Hello everyone, welcome to the show after the show, freezer curry edition. So for this episode, what I wanted to do was talk to you about what other things that I freeze regularly in case it prompts an idea for you that you might want to start freezing them too. And these are the things that if you open my freezer at any point, you probably see all of these or most of these. So in terms of finished food, I don't actually freeze too much finished food because I cook so much, but when we do, it's usually chili, which freezes and thaws really well. Just the only thing about chili is make sure when you freeze it, I use freezer bags. Don't overfill the bag, otherwise it takes forever to thaw. If you keep the bag quite thin, then it thaws a lot faster. And along that same line, tomato sauce and bolognese sauce also freeze really well, and we often freeze the leftover bolognese and tomato sauce. But what is always in my freezer is homemade chicken stock and pork stock. Because it is so useful, I use chicken stock all the time, and it prevents you, if you have stock in the freezer, two things will happen. It prevents you from using water in soup or whatever it is, so automatically like there's extra flavor. Two, noodle soups become a snap to make once you've got frozen stock. And again, you want to freeze it in a bag that's quite thin. And if you're cooking and you only need just a little bit, I just soak the bag in hot tap water, and within a few minutes you will have thawed enough of the stock to use in cooking. Say you only need like half a cup or a cup in the stir fry or whatever. You leave it in hot water. I open whatever's melted, pour out whatever's melted, close the bag, and stick the rest of the still frozen stock back in the freezer. And then with noodle soup, I just thaw it enough so that I can fit it into my pot, and then I just let it heat up in the pot. And then all you need is some noodles, meat, season the broth, like instant ramen. If you've got miso in the fridge, you get like miso flavored ramen, like really quickly. So having homemade stock is always useful, and we always have chicken and pork in the freezer. Bread products. This is something a lot of people don't think to do, is freeze your bread. It's the best way to preserve the freshness of the bread, even though it sounds really counterintuitive. And I'm not talking at this point about like Wonder Bread with all sorts of chemicals thrown into it, because they have so much chemicals added to those breads that they don't really ever go stale, no matter what you do to it, right? I'm talking about bread that is like artisanally made, you know, bread that's got no chemicals, bread you get from a bakery. You will notice if you've bought those that they go stale on the counter really quickly. You put that in the fridge, it'll stale even faster. So for me, when I buy bread, it goes, unless I'm eating it right now, it goes straight in the freezer. When you freeze bread, when you either toast it or reheat it again, it comes out exactly the same as it went in. So the only thing you'll need to do is if it wasn't already pre-sliced, you want to slice all of it before putting in the freezer, because trust me, trying to slice a frozen loaf of bread is very difficult. But when I worked in a bakery way back when, my pastry chef always told me, fresh bread goes straight in the freezer unless you're eating it right now, today. Because it stales very quickly otherwise. Baked goods, the rule of thumb is the higher the fat, the better they freeze. And in the same way, the lower the water content, the better they freeze. So fatty cakes, cookie dough, cookies, things like that freeze really well. I have cookie dough in my freezer. I have baked cookies in my freezer as well. And they thaw, if it's a soft cookie, you can just nuke it in the microwave and have a soft cookie in like a few seconds. If it's cookie dough, then you just bake it as normal. It doesn't really take much extra time. Maybe by the time, so I pull it out while I'm preheating the oven, so it has time to thaw. By the time the oven is ready, I bake it, and it usually takes maybe 1 more minute or 2 more minutes to bake, but not a whole lot more. All the bakeries I've ever worked at all freeze their cookie dough, because it's not efficient otherwise, right, for them to make a batch every day. Yes, you have a question.
Yeah, so you form the cookies though?
Yeah, you freeze them in round chunks. Yeah, yeah. You don't want to freeze the whole thing because then it's impossible to get out. Yeah, so all the bakeries that I've ever worked at, and I've worked at a few, they all freeze their cookie dough. And then they just bake off whatever they need to sell that day. And they also freeze a lot of cakes. Fully, like cakes that are basically stacked in layers already, and then when they want to sell it, they just bring it out, let it thaw, and then frost. Chili powder and chili flakes, I also freeze those because they get mold in them, and it's really hard to tell once they're powdered whether they're moldy or not. And most people don't go through chili flakes all that fast. So whenever I make chili flakes, I throw it in the freezer and then it'll last forever, right? So that's always for me. Nuts that you don't use often. Baking nuts like walnuts, pecans, almonds, because if you leave nuts outside in the pantry, they go rancid fast. And rancid nuts, not good for your health. You always want to smell your nuts before you... Adam, stop. But you always want to smell your nuts before you eat or use them because you want to make sure they haven't gone rancid. Nuts should not really smell of anything when they're raw. If it has a weird rancid oil smell, you don't want to use that. And to prevent that, either in the fridge or the freezer would be better. At the catering company I used to work at, they have a huge baking department. All of their nuts are always in the freezer because nut oils are very, very volatile. Is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah, like they do not last long, especially outside at room temperature. Curry paste. Unless you've got plans to use your curry paste, open jar of curry paste or something that you've made, unless you've got plans for it immediately, straight into the freezer. There's no benefit in keeping it in the fridge because curry paste don't really freeze super solid. There's not a whole lot of water in them, so usually even if it's frozen, you can easily break off a chunk and throw it in your pot directly from frozen. So there's no benefit in having it in the fridge. And if you freeze them flat in a bag, it's even easier to just break off a chunk and use it. Sometimes when I make a lot of curry paste, I will put it in like a freezer bag and I will separate it into sections so that I know, okay, one recipe is this much. It's in the same bag. You know what I'm talking about? Like you just create creases in the curry paste and then I fold it over so that in one bag there are actually 3 sections of curry paste. Then I don't have to break it off. In terms of herbs, there are 3 herbs that go directly in the freezer. They don't spend any time in my fridge unless I'm using it today. Kaffir lime leaves, pandan leaves, and Thai chilies. Because these things thaw. Pandan leaves and kaffir lime leaves thaw incredibly well. They're very sturdy leaves, so they don't suffer in the freezer. And Thai chilies, most of the time, I'm gonna mush it up or chop it up or, you know, like I don't need Thai chilies to be whole and beautiful, so they just go directly into my freezer. But chilies will thaw mushy, so if for whatever reason you need your chilies to be, like a garnished chili to be intact, don't freeze those. Ginger, lemongrass, and galangal I also freeze, but for those, I'm a little more lenient because there is a benefit in not freezing them, in a sense that for ginger, lemongrass, and galangal, once you freeze them, it's very hard to cut into small pieces. So you've got to cut them before you freeze them. So it's easier to have them sort of linger in your fridge and you just like slice up however much you want when you're ready to use them. And then just freeze whatever you don't use within the week. So with ginger, lemongrass, and galangal, I give it about a week or 2 in my fridge. And then if I look at it and it's like, okay, you know what, I don't have any plans for these, they're not gonna get used, then I slice them up and freeze them. So the decision to freeze sort of depends on, is there a benefit in them not being frozen, right? And if there is, I give them more time. If there isn't, straight in the freezer, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't waste anything. If you're gonna freeze ginger, lemongrass, galangal, make sure you check out, I think, my Galangal 101 video where I show you how to freeze these herbs to prevent freezer burn. And it involves wrapping it in foil and in a freezer bag and all of that, then things will last even longer. Oh, dried shrimp is also something that I freeze. So just as an FYI, and they like do not deteriorate at all in the freezer. They come out exactly the same. So that's another thing I freeze as well. And that is it. I hope that gives you some idea of what you might want to freeze and things like that. And if you have any other questions or you have suggestions on what you freeze that work for you really well, feel free to share with us below. Do you have any other questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So that's it, you guys. And I will see you next time. Thank you as always for your support. Bye.
Bye-bye.